Gary Klein is a research psychologist famous for pioneering in the field of naturalistic decision making. Today's story is from his seminal book, Seeing What Others Don't: The Remarkable Ways We Gain Insights. My favorite quote from the book is his definition of insight. He says, "Insight is an unexpected shift to a better story." Welcome back to Stories at Work, a series where I share real stories from across the world that you can use to drive home a business point. Our website, storyworks.in, already has over 100 stories, and we are adding one every week. Let's begin today's story from the same book. In his book, Seeing What Others Don't: The Remarkable Ways We Gain Insights, Gary Klein shares a fascinating explanation for a phenomenon we might have seen or experienced often, getting used to irritants like a pothole or noise pollution or bad service. It's like sometimes we are a frog in a pan slowly boiling in boiling water. He writes about a conversation with his wife, Helen. One day, Helen says, "My front door key doesn't work well. Maybe it's the lock." Gary immediately replies, "No, no, no. Well, my key works fine, so it isn't the lock. Must be your key." Gary then goes to a hardware store and makes a new key for Helen. Upon returning home, he tests it out. It doesn't work too well. And he thinks perhaps the key duplication machine at the store was defective. Gary goes to a second hardware store and makes another key. That key too doesn't work. Gary tries his own key again, and watching it very carefully, he realizes it actually sticks pretty badly. Gary then squirts a little lubricant into the lock, and all the keys are now working fine. Eventually, Gary solves the problem. Helen can now get into the house without any effort. Now, in the book, Gary writes, "This is a garden path story." A garden path story are stories about how someone adopts to an erroneous frame and tenaciously perseveres it despite mounting evidence to the contrary. He says, "Once I got onto the garden path, the erroneous belief that the problem was the key, I just stayed on it. I ignored the evidence from the first hardware store and went to the second." Now, with garden path stories, we want to know how people got onto the garden path, and then how can they get off it, if they ever do. Could I have gone to a third hardware store after my 2 tries failed? I have to admit it's possible. In probing more deeply, we might wonder how I ever got onto the garden path in the first place. It was my belief that my key was working fine when it wasn't. Yet, my key didn't suddenly start sticking. It happened gradually. So this is a routinization of deviance story. There are cases in which an anomalous event gets repeated often to become almost familiar so that it no longer triggers any warning. Dan Vaughan, professor of sociology at Columbia University, described NASA's Challenger tragedy as a routinization of deviance. The safety engineers initially were worried about the O-rings and how it got scorched because that wasn't supposed to happen. However, as more and more missions came back with scorched O-rings, the engineers stopped being concerned. In my case, as the lock got stickier, I came to accept the extra jiggling I needed to do as part of my practice. I got used to it, and it became the new normal for how the key worked. Over time, the jiggling increased, but never enough to shake me out, says Gary. What a story. The message from the story is clear. Beware of mindlessly walking down the garden path. Ask yourself and your teams, which deviances are we routinizing? What exceptions or shortcuts are we turning into regular habits? And what bad habits are we letting become normal? I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, there are over 100 more on our website, storyworks.in. See you next week. Bye for now.